Hello everybody and welcome back to Principles of Game Design. In this episode we are going to be building the second of our Maya assignments, the chair. To get us started we're going to go ahead and set our project, File, and if you're lucky you'll find your project in your recent projects. If not, we're going to go back to Set Project and we're just going to go look for the project we built last time. I have mine in my external drive, and you want to make sure that you're setting your project inside of your Maya folder where you can see all of your subfolders. Once you've gone ahead and set your project, we're going to double back to D2L real quick. And the reason is because we have these lovely reference images as well as a link to the chair website. The chair website happens to host the dimensions of the chair as well as this lovely image which you can rotate if you want more reference. So let's go ahead and quickly save all of our references. I'm going to go back to D2L, right-click these images, and save image as. Now I've gone ahead and saved them in advance, but the important thing to note is that I'm saving them to my Maya's source images folder. So this is our project directory that we made. We want to put them in our source images folder, and the reason why will become apparent very quickly. Once you've saved your reference images, go back to Maya and hit the spacebar. Now you might remember that we have a front and side reference image, and we happen to have a front and side view. Each of these view panels has a view button, and if you click one of them, let's go ahead and click our front view panel. Down at the bottom we have this image plane section, where we can import an image. And since we're in our front view, I'm going to click Chair Front. Note that it has automatically opened directly to my source images folder because we set our project. So again, we're in the front view, so I'm going to click Chair Front, and now my image is inside of Maya. I'm also going to do the same thing for the side, so Side X, View, Image Plane, Import Image, Chair Side. And I have my two reference images inside the project. I'm going to go ahead and click my perspective view and hit spacebar, and you'll notice that the images don't quite line up alright. That's okay, it's still better than nothing. Now to get this as accurate as possible, I'm going to go ahead and create a cube. And the reason I'm creating this cube is because if you remember from the dice project, we can change the width, height, and depth of our cube in our channel box. So I'm going to very quickly double back to the website, and I'm going to copy these dimensions, 19.5 deep by 17.6 wide by 32.7 tall. Let's go ahead and plug these over here. 19.5 deep, 32.7 height, 17.6 wide. And these are the dimensions of the chair, except for one small detail. If you go back to the website, we'll notice that they happen to be in inches. My by default uses centimeters, so we need to convert between inches and centimeters. If you go ahead and Google the conversion rate, or if you happen to know it off the top of your head, you'll know that it's about 2.54 to be exact. So I'm going to re-click my cube, and rather than doing a bunch of math to scale up these numbers, I can instead simply add that 2.54 to my scale. So 2.54, 2.54, 2.54. And now this is the correct size for my chair. However, it has completely taken over my image planes and my grid, so we need to fix that next. I'm going to start by hitting the spacebar and going to my front and side views. Now if I go to my front view and I try to use the movement tool to move it up and eyeball it, it's going to be very difficult to figure out exactly where the base is. So to fix that, I'm going to hit the D key, and the D key will give me this modified widget. What this widget allows me to do is to move my arrows and pivot point without moving the object. Now I want to move the pivot point to the bottom of my box, and I want to get it as accurate as possible. So I am going to hold the V key. Now you'll notice in the top right, or in the middle, that we have this snap to points thing on, this little magnet that turns on when I hold the V key. So, once more time, select the cube, hit the D key so that we have the pivot movement, hold the V key so that we have snap to vertex, and what that'll allow us to do is to move the widget to the closest vertex that we are holding our mouse over. So I'm going to move the widget down to the bottom, and now I'm going to hit W to get out of the widget movement tool, and that allows me to move my cube by the base of it. Now I just need to snap my cube down to the base of the grid, and in order to do that I'm going to hold the X key, and that is going to turn on this little magnet, which has a little grid next to it, and this is the grid snap tool. So you'll notice that as I move my mouse up and down, I now snap the cube to the grid. So I'm going to snap it to the axis, that big thick black line. So now my cube is perfectly on the grid. Great, and we can see it in our perspective view, but it's still a little bit tiny. So now let's fix the grid. If you go to the display menu, top left, you can find the grid right here. Clicking this little checkbox will simply turn the grid on and off. If you want to edit the grid, you can also go into this happy little box, and this will pull up the grid dimensions. So currently, our grid is 12 centimeters wide and deep. We're going to need it quite a bit bigger. So since we're in the ballpark of a couple inches, specifically close to about a yard, I'm going to go ahead and make my grid about 100 centimeters. That'll be about right. And if I hit apply, we'll notice that my grid is now quite a bit larger. Now previously, we have these grid lines every 5 centimeters and subdivisions every single centimeter. This can get a little bit blurry if we zoom out to a larger scale. In order to fix that, we can lower our grid lines, so let's say we have a grid line every 10 centimeters. Now it's a little bit less dense. Let's go ahead and make this maybe a little larger as well. Let's change it back to 20, see if that's any better. That's a lot less cluttered. Good. So I'm going to have it every 20 centimeters and subdivisions every 5. Now, if you want a little bit more detail between all of your grid lines, you can also change the colors here. So I'm going to make my axes a little darker, make them nice and black, so now they're very prominent and easy to see. And if you want, you can change your grid lines and subdivision colors as well, so that you can see the difference between those. However, sometimes this can be a little bit trippy, especially with larger grids, so use that at your own discretion. Alright, now that we've fixed our grid, let's fix our image planes. So I'm going to start by hitting 4 so that I can see through my box, and then I'm going to go to my side views. And you'll notice that even though I hit 4 in my main perspective view, which gave me the wireframe, it has not changed inside of either of my other views. If I want to change them in my other views, I have to click into them and hit the 4 key there as well. Now I'm going to go into each of these views one at a time. I'm going to select my image plane, and I'm going to scale it up until it just fits inside of my blue reference box. And it's alright if it clips out a little bit, because this is a perspective image on a flat plane, so it won't fit perfectly. But here we have my box and the chair inside of it. Let's go ahead and also do that on my side view. Remember, hit space after clicking inside of a view to switch the view. Move it up, scale up the image. Let's see. Oh, so if we click on our cube, you can see that it's a little bit pushed far forward. So let's go ahead and drag our image back just a bit. Move it up, scale it up a bit more, and there we go. Now the legs are on the floor, and it's alright if it is halfway above the box, because according to the perspective, this is about where it should be. Alright, now let's come back to our perspective view, and I don't want my images in the way of my modeling, so I'm going to go ahead and select them and push them out of the way. Great. So now I have this box where I can model, and my image planes on either side, as well as pre-set up side views so that I can edit on them. One final step for initial setup is the layers panel down here in the bottom right. So if I go into this layers panel, what it allows me to do is sort these objects so that I don't interrupt my modeling. Now before I use the layers panel, I'm going to select my main cube, and I'm going to drag a clone by holding shift and pulling out a copy. So now I have two cubes. Let me go ahead and center on my perspective view so that you can get a better idea of what I'm up to. So I have the clone that I just dragged out, and I have the original bounding box. Now I'm going to click my original bounding box and go down to the bottom right where I have my layers, and I'm going to create a layer from selected. Note that I only have the original box selected, and now I have this layer 1. I'm going to go ahead and double click it and change the name to bounding box, or bounding. Now this layer contains this singular box, and I can click this third empty box to change properties about the object. So if I click it once, I am now in a T mode. This is a transparent mode, which does not allow me to select the bounding box, but I'll always have the wireframe so that I can make sure that anything I build inside doesn't escape. I can also put it on R, which gives me a reference mode, where I still can't select the object, but it is completely visible. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the bounding box on T, so that we can have this transparent guideline. Now I'm also going to go ahead and select both of my image planes, and I'm going to create a new layer from selected, and I'm going to name this one reference. Now since this is my reference layer, I can put it on T, but because they're image planes, they will not show up, so instead I'm going to put it on R, and now they are reference images which I cannot interact with, but they will always be visible for me. Now I still have the duplicate bounding box. I'm going to go ahead and reset the transforms to 0, 0. Oop, not my Y value, because I need it up. There we go. So now I have my bounding box where it should be, and the reason that I've gone ahead and done this is because it happens to be the same height as the chair, which means that I can go ahead and scale it down in 2 directions, and it'll still be as tall as the chair should be. The reason I've done this is because it happens to give me a good example for what the back of the chair will look like. I'm going to go into one of my orthographic views, hit spacebar, go into my front view, and I'm going to line it up with one of the side legs. Now I can't scale it in the correct direction here because I want to scale it in both the width and height directions. So I don't know if it's the same if I scale it this way as if I scale it in another direction, which is why I like to work with all of my views visible. If you don't want all of your views visible though, you can always switch between a 1 view, a 4 view, and a 2 view in the side panel on your left. So for our purposes, I'm going to use the left image here as my reference while I work in the perspective view to make sure that I'm scaling everything right. So I'm going to go into my perspective view, and I'm going to use my scale tool, and I'm going to go ahead and shrink this leg uniformly until it looks roughly the right size as the chair leg in the back there. Good. Now I also want to make sure that I'm moving it in the correct dimension so that I can line it up with the chair over there. And this is going to be the back of my chair leg, so I'm going to line it up in my side view over here. Now in order to switch this view on my left panel to the side view so that I can work in that dimension, I'm going to hold the spacebar. And by holding the spacebar and using left click right over where it says Maya, I can change between multiple camera views. This is very similar to when we right click to switch between our edge and object select. We're just going to hold spacebar and left click to get camera select. So now I want a side view, so I'm going to go left, zoom out, here it is, select my object, and I'm going to line it up to the back point on my chair. There we go. Now we're going to work in this bend later, but for now I'm just going to block out the rest of the chair. Now I'm going to hold shift and use my movement tool, and what that's going to do is it's going to give me a clone or a duplicate of my object that I can use for the front leg. Since my pivot is still at the bottom, I can just hold R to get my scale tool and scale it down to roughly the right height. And that's giving me a good silhouette for what the chair will look like. Now I also need to block out the body of the chair, the seat rather, so I'm going to create a new cube. I'm going to hold Shift to create a cube. Here it is. And rather than eyeballing it to make sure that it is the right size, I can always remember the dimensions of the original. So I'm going to quickly add in my 2.54, 2.54, 2.54, and then since it's the seat, I only need to care about the width and the depth, which were 19.5 by 17.6. And this has given me something that looks like the seat. I'm going to go ahead and drag it up to the top of the front leg, where it meets up with the back leg, right about there. Alright, a few more details. We need these sidebars. Now, this doesn't give me a good idea of whether there's one sidebar or two, so I'm going to very quickly come back over here and rotate this image around. So this other sidebar happens to be the sidebar on the back leg, so we only really care about the bottom sidebar in the reference image. Good to know. So let's come back to Maya, and we're going to go ahead and select that front chair leg. I'm going to hold Shift to drag a duplicate, and I'm going to rotate it with the E key, E for rotate it along the side, and then move it up. Now you'll notice that when I rotated it, it happened to rotate very smoothly. And now that we've rotated it, we don't have a clean rotation. We're at negative 89.696. If you want to make sure that your rotations snap perfectly to certain angles, you can hold the J key before you start rotating it, and that will rotate it at increments of around 15 degrees. So let's go for a flat 90 and move this to line up there. Alright, so now we have the base of the chair, the two legs. Let's also add in the backboard. So we've got two backboards. In order to make those, I think I'll just duplicate the seat. So hold Shift, drag up a clone, rotate it 90 degrees by holding J. Tuck, 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 tuck. There we go. Let's swap our side view to a front view. So let's go to front, and let's scale it down until it matches the back panel. And let's also put it in 4 view, just so that we can be sure that we are lining it up correctly. Good. And one more for the top back panel. There we go. So this is our blockout. Oh, let's go ahead and move the back panels to the back of the chair. Now that we have our blockout finished, let's start adding in those details to get it as close to the reference as possible. In order to do that, I'm going to start by bending the back leg. So, my first step is going to be selecting the back leg and isolating it by hitting Control 1. Control 1 toggles isolation between your current selection and everything in the scene. So for instance, if I hit Control 1 right now, everything will pop back. If I select a couple more things, I can hit Control 1, and it'll hide everything except what I have selected. This also works with faces. So if I go ahead and isolate just the back leg, select one of the faces, and I hit Control 1 again, I now have just the one face. So, what I'm going to be doing is isolating that back leg, and I'm going to change my front view over here to a side view. Let's go back to the left view, so that I can create this little arch. Now, we happen to have these tools up here in the top menu bars called Deform, and specifically the Nonlinear Deforms, which are about halfway down the Deform menu. What these let us do is to bend and warp topology. So we're going to go ahead and select bend. And what that's going to do, if I hit 4, is inside of my bar I now have this bend controller, which is a straight curve. And inside of my channel box, you'll notice that I now have a bunch of values that I can change. So for instance, if we crank up our curvature to, let's say, 90, you'll notice that I now have the guideline of where my curve used to be, the new bent curve, and if I hit 5, you'll notice that the back leg has turned into a stick. The reason for that is because there's not enough edge loops inside of our back leg. So I'm going to very quickly undo until I get rid of that bend deformer. So you'll notice that that stick in the middle is gone. And I'm going to add a bunch of edge loops to my back leg. I'm going to go to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop, select the little black square. Now I have my multiple edge loops, and I'm going to add far too many. Let's go with 20. Click. And I have 20 edge loops up and down my back leg. And I can go back to Object Select, select my back leg, go to Deform, Nonlinear, Bend. And inside of my object, I now once again have my bend controller. Over here in my inputs, I'm going to type in that same curvature I had earlier, 90, and you'll notice that now that I have a bunch of edge loops up and down my back leg, I get this nice smooth curve. So our next step, now that we know how the bend deformer works, is to make sure that this curve matches up with our curve on the chair. In order to do that, I'm going to select the bend deformer, and I'm going to rotate it to make sure that my bend is in the same direction as the chair. If we look at our side view, you'll notice that the back leg is currently bending in the wrong direction. We can double check that by hitting Ctrl 1, and notice how it bends in the wrong direction. So we need to rotate our bend to rotate correctly. I'm just going to hold J and rotate it that way. And now you have this nice big C. Alright, let's go ahead and isolate my bend deformer and my chair leg again, and we can still see them over here in the side view. Nope. Let's go ahead and move our bend back a little bit. Select everything and move it this way. And you'll notice that our bend starts at the bottom and the top in equal measure. That's a problem, because the bend only really kicks in about halfway up the chair leg. So let's reset our curvature back to 0. And let's start by matching up this initial rotation. So I'm going to go ahead and angle my chair leg a bit. Whoop. I'm currently rotating just the chair leg. Let's go ahead and whoop, angle it this way, move it into position. There we go. Now let's also take my curve, rotate it the same amount, make sure that it is set correctly inside of my chair leg. Good. And now let's go ahead and add in another curvature. This time I will go with 20. And I'm going to put it back on wireframe in my side view so that we can see what's going on in here. So by adding in that slight curvature, we've bent the bottom of the chair as well as the top of the chair. In order to fix that, we need to change our low and high bounds. So I'm going to change my low bound from -1 to 0, and that's going to cut off the bottom half of my bend. So now I have this perfectly straight bottom of my chair leg and the bendy part of the top. Now we can move our bend around and change this number, maybe crank it up to 40, until we get the right angle. So let's put it about there, just move the bend deformer around until we get the correct shape. Let's go ahead and hit Ctrl 1 again, 5 again, and we can see that it has the shape of the back leg. Let's double back to D2L really quickly. We'll notice that the top of the chair leg and the bottom of the chair leg are thinner than it is in the middle. So that means we're going to have to taper our chair leg. In order to do that, we're going to have to get rid of our bend deformer. So let's go ahead and Control-Alt-Save. Save this as chair. And now we have our chair saved. So we're going to go ahead and edit, delete by type, history. And that's going to get rid of our bend deformer, but it's not going to get rid of our chair leg. if we simply select the bend deformer and delete it, it'll undo our bend, which is why we need to delete by type history. Again, edit, delete by type, history. Good. Now let's add in that flare. So I'm going to go to Deform, Nonlinear, and I'm going to add in a flare. And it's going to give me this silly little circle shape. Now, the bottom is the start and the top is the end. So for instance, if I add a start flare of 0.5, you'll notice that the bottom of the chair has grown thinner. Let's also make sure that it is symmetrical in both directions. 0.5, 0.5, good. And now same thing up top, 0.5, 0.5. But if we do that, you'll notice that it messes up our bend. In order to fix that, we need to change our bounds, and we'll probably have to use multiple flares. So let's undo the top flare, and let's change our high bound to 0. So now it only flares from the middle down. We can also see that it has slightly messed up our chair leg, so we need to push it back into the chair leg, make sure that we've got it right. Great. And in fact, we can see that it might be a little bit too thin, so I'm going to change these to 0.6 and 0.6. Alright, let's call that good enough. Now that we've added in that bend, or that flare rather, we need to select the main object, edit, delete by type history. And that gets rid of our flare. Now let's add in another flare, deform, full nonlinear, flare. And this time we're going to get rid of the low bound again, hit that to 0, and we're going to rotate our flare so that it lines up with the path of our chair leg. And this time we'll change our end flare again to 0.6 and 0.6. And now it gets thinner up top, thicker in the middle, and thinner at the bottom. Perfect. Now we're going to go ahead and edit, delete by type history to get rid of our flare. So this is our finished chair leg, and if we smooth it, we can see that it sort of fits, but it needs a lot of fencing. So let's go ahead and isolate it, and we're going to add those fences in. We're going to go ahead and add them all the way around, and to make sure that it's symmetrical, I'm going to start by adding in divisions that are 50% of the way through up and down, and then go, well, let's go 30, 70, 30, same thing on the other side, 30, 30, and then delete the guidelines that we made in the middle. So now here's my fenced chair leg, and if I smooth it, it looks like it's been carved the same way that the original is in the image. Perfect. Now let's continue on by fixing up the front leg. So the front leg is similarly angled to the back leg. Whoop. Let's go ahead and do that. And if we take a closer look, it is also thinner at the bottom. So we're going to need to taper this. Let's go ahead and start by adding in some edge loops. Edge tool, insert edge loop. We probably don't need 20 this time around. Let's go for a solid 8. Add those in, up. And then we can go back to object mode, deform, nonlinear, flare. Oh, it didn't like it. Let's try it again. Make sure that it's selected, nonlinear flare. No such luck. Alright, let's go ahead and see if it's a control 1 issue. It is not. Let's see if it is a history issue. Might not be. But since we're having difficulties, this is always a good time to control alt S to increment and save. Alright, let's go back to object selection, please. One more time. Deform, nonlinear, flare. There we go, it worked that time. Third time's the charm. Alright, now we're editing the bottom, so we need to modify our start flare. Let's go 0.6, the same way we had it on the back leg. See how that lines up. Might be a little too thin. 0.65 perhaps. Let's call that good. But we have accidentally shrunk a bit of the top leg, so I'm going to change my low bound, or rather my high bound. Let's go to 0, so that it flares around halfway down the leg. Otherwise, we could always leave the high bound as is and make the top a little thicker. Let's say 1.2, 1.2. That's actually a little bit better. Let's do that. Alright, and then let's hit smooth. And we're losing some of the definition at the top and bottom, which means we're going to need to fence it. So one more time, just as we did with the back leg, we're going to start by deleting weight type history to get rid of the flare, isolate it so that we get a better idea of what we're working with, grab our multi-cut tool, hold Control and Shift to add in cuts that are perfectly down the middle, and then one more time, let's go 30, 30, 30, 30, delete our guidelines in the middle, smooth preview it, and that's looking a lot better. Alright, let's give it another look. Good. Now let's fix this middle bar. We're going to rotate around, and I'm just going to scale it down. But you'll notice that my pivot is off to the side because we duplicated it from the other objects which had their pivots on one end. So we need to fix this pivot so that we don't pull it from the back. I'm going to go to Modify and Center Pivot, and that recenters my pivot to the middle of the object. Now I can simply scale it in, and I'm also going to make it a little thinner so that it looks like it slots into the legs. Much better. Now we also need to fix the back seat so that it lines up with the angle we put on the top of the chair. I'm going to go ahead and hit space on my side view, turn it back to my front view, and I'm going to rotate these around so that it lines up with these chair legs. So I'm just going to rotate them around and then push them in, make sure that they line up. Same thing with the top one, rotate it around, push it in, and you'll notice that there's a little bit of the chair legs that stick up above them. So I think I actually need to push this down a tad so that I still get that effect. Let's go about there. Rotate it, make sure that it's alright. Okay, and I also want to make them thinner, just like that sidebar, so that it looks like they plug into the chair leg. Same thing here. Let's go ahead and make it a little thinner. Great. And then I also want to make sure that it's not sticking out the side of my chair leg, so we're going to go ahead and scale it this way. Good. Now it doesn't line up perfectly with the reference image, but that's alright. Remember that that reference image is a perspective shot, so it's not 100% accurate. But we just want to get this as close as possible. Alright. Let's call that good enough. Now let's build the seat. The seat is also curved and bent, so we're going to have to bend our chair seat. Now let's go ahead and add some edge loops. Mesh tool, insert edge loop. And let's make sure that we're not adding too many. 8 seems fine. And we're going to add them going both ways. Let's go ahead and add our nonlinear bend deform. Go to Object, select it, Deform, Nonlinear Bend. And we'll notice that the bend deformer starts vertically. We need to lay it down sideways, so we're going to select it and rotate it 90 degrees by holding the J key. Now we need to figure out which way it's bending, so we're going to insert a rather large number. Oh, we happen to be bending in the correct direction. Alright, let's change our 90 to, say, 20 then, and see if we can get a bend similar enough to this lip. Let's also go ahead and move the chair seat down a bit 20 might be a bit too much. Let's try 15. Get a good side view of it. Let's see if the side view gives us any more insight into how much it bends exactly. The perspective doesn't really help there. Alright. Well, let's say that this seat is decently bent in the correct ways. Alright. Now that we've gone ahead and bent the seat, we need to make sure that it is correctly shaped. So if we go back to the website, we can see that the back is very curved, the front corners curve, and the back is also a little bit thinner than it is in the front, which means we'll need to flare this. Alright, so let's go ahead and select the chair. Let's edit, delete by type history again. And now let's start by flaring it, and then we'll add in the curvatures on the ends. So, deform, nonlinear flare, rotate our flare, we'll put the end in the back, and we'll flare the end shorter. So let's go, let's go 0.7, maybe a bit too much, 0.9 then, let's see if that's any better. I kind of want it to not clip into the chair leg at least, 0.8. That seems about right. Alright, let's go with that for now. Let's reselect the chair leg, or the chair seat, and delete by type history. Alright. Now we need to start by curving it. What does it look like when it's smoothed? Oh, it's got way too many edges, so it doesn't curve right. So let's delete a couple of them. We're going to start with the outside edges. And remember that when we're deleting edges, we want to hold the control so that we don't end up with extra vertices. Let's smooth it and see how that is. That's a little better. But they are definitely more curved, more circular, especially towards the back. So we're going to grab the back corners and we're going to pull them in. And let's also go ahead and scale them a little closer. And then we'll do the same thing for all of these. Just pull them back and try and create something that feels curved, feels circular. And now let's go ahead and smooth it. And that gives us something that feels like the back of the chair. We need to make sure that it doesn't interact with the back legs. And to make sure that we're doing that on both sides, I want to have this back leg over on the other side. So I'm going to select it, and I'm going to mirror it by going to Mesh and Mirror. Now when I click Mirror, it'll give me this tiny little menu. Now we've happened to have modeled this correctly, so that it's in the X negative direction. But you can still change this to, say, the Y direction if you want to mirror it down, or the Z direction if you want to mirror it forward. The Z direction, please. There we go. But for our purposes, we do want it in the X direction. So there we go. Now we can continue working on our seat and making sure that it matches the reference. Now you see me toggling back and forth between the website, but if you don't want to do that, you are more than welcome to go ahead and grab that back perspective and simply copy it, save it to your source images file, and import it into Maya the same way we did with the other images. So let's go ahead and do that. There we go. And now we have, when we are in smooth view, that little gap that is between the seat and the chair legs. So let's go with that. Alright, now let's fix the front, because we also want to go ahead and make this feel a little bit more circular. So I'm going to grab the front two edges, and I'm going to scale them in. Whoop. That feels about right. Let's give this another turn. See how straight it is in the back, see how straight it is in the front. Let's see if we have something similar. Probably needs a little bit of fencing to make sure that it is perfect, but this is very close. Alright. But there is another issue, which is that the front legs definitely plug into the bottom of the seat. So I think we do actually need to flare the front of the chair now out a bit. So let's go ahead and flare, nonlinear flare. Rotate this around. And let's try and just flare out the front. 1.2, 1.2. Alright, let's see what that looks like. That looks fine. I wish we had a top view of this chair, but the edges look fairly straight to me, so this feels just about right. Alright, select it, delete by type history, and this will be the front of the chair, or the seat of the chair. And let's move the front legs in a bit, just to make sure that they plug into the bottom of the seat. Good. Now we also need to readjust the sidebar, select that front face, and also pull it in so that it plugs into the front leg. Great. Now we can go ahead and mirror the front leg, as well as the sidebar. Select them, mesh mirror. There they are. Alright, now that we've mirrored the front legs, it's time for the final detail, which are the bars that hold up the seat. Now it's not clearly visible in the front view or the side view, but these bars don't go straight. If we look at the 3/4 view on the website, we can see that those bars are actually sunk in under the seat and connect to another bar on the back. So we need to go ahead and add those in. First, let's add in the front bar and the back bar, and then we'll add in the bars underneath the seat. So I'm going to go ahead and create another cube. Go ahead and drag it up. Drag it over to the front of the seats. Put it right about there. And scale it up. And let's go ahead and switch back to our front view so that we can make sure that it's the right size. It's not square, so we're going to go ahead and shrink it down this way. And we're going to go ahead and plug it into our front legs. Like so. Perfect. And now that we've done that, we have a bar that we can duplicate to the back of the chair. See if it's straight in the reference image. Seems straight to me. Doesn't match the angle of the back leg. Let's maybe make it a little thicker. Perfect. And now let's add in the horizontal bars. So I'm going to go ahead and hold shift, pull out a duplicate, rotate this duplicate 90 degrees, and move it over off to the side. It's not clear precisely how off to the side it is, but we can see that there's a little gap. So I'm going to go ahead and move it about there, shrink it down a bit, and just sort of float it until it feels good. And then we also need to make sure that it's not clipping through the front, so I'll just pull this face back. And there's the first sidebar, and then we need to mirror it onto the other side. Mesh mirror. And that is our version of the chair. Now we're not quite done yet, so join me in the next video where we'll be putting on some finishing touches and optimizing our topology.